both because it's automatic and because that's how you protect your family. And I had a little bit of a different experience. When I was about 13, I actually went into a Palestinian village, and this was the first time I interacted with Palestinians as equals. I mean, Jerusalem is 40% Palestinian. That said, growing up, that was not part of my experience. The only Palestinians I ever met were probably cleaning our school. But at this point, I went into a Palestinian village. I went there for an activity of olive tree planting, and we were changing the water pipe of the village. We were painting, drawing on the neighboring village, on the school there. And at some point, this was 2003, at some point one of the Palestinians kind of brings us all together and points down at the valley and says, this is where they're going to build the wall. And at the time, no one really knew what that meant. It was a decision made in 2002. It was this vague idea. And I kind of got a front row ticket to understand what that meant on people's lives, because I kept going to that village for the next few months and then years and see, you know, the olive trees that we planted were uprooted. The water pipe that we laid down was dangling over the fence for 4 or 5 years. The school was now on the other side of the fence, so they have to go through a checkpoint every day to get to that, to get to school. That checkpoint is their own private checkpoint just for the village, and they have a list of names, and you can only go in and out if you're on the list. So, you know, you come back from work, you come back from school, you come back from everything, you have to open your bag, show them what you have, make sure they're on the list, they let you in. And it's, I mean, for me, there were a lot of stories with that village of much more brutal violence. But for me, that idea of, you know, hearing kids complaining that they can't bring friends home, you know, it's not a grave violation of human rights, right? We can think of worse things. But it's just such a daily, different reality than what I had. You know, you can't bring friends home because they're not on the list in the checkpoint. And for me, understanding that was understanding a lot about what occupation meant. That this completely different reality in which you have 18-year-old kids deciding what's going to happen with your life at any given moment, and that's when it's okay. That's when nothing goes wrong and there isn't all these crazy stories of violence that we hear about all the time. So that was kind of my experience into activism, into understanding that I can't be an Israeli and be protected by that wall when I know that's not what it does. That you go with the root of the fence, and you've been doing this for the last 2 weeks. You see, it has nothing to do with security. It doesn't separate between Palestinians and Israelis. You have about 90,000 Jews on the Palestinian side and about 400,000 Palestinians on the Israeli side. It has nothing to do with separation. And you look where it passes in valleys, which from a security perspective is the stupidest thing you could possibly do. But it happens to be good in annexing land in that area. And you just see how it has nothing to do with security. So I started going to different protests, and we would go to these protests in different Palestinian villages. Bil'in, probably the most famous one of them. And I'm this, I don't know, 14, 15-year-old kid going to a protest that I am still, although I understand that the occupation's bad, I'm still absolutely convinced that the purpose of soldiers in life is to protect me. That is what they do. And Palestinians, I'm scared of them. I mean, I'm knowingly going into these villages. I might know that I'm not supposed to be, but I'm scared of Palestinians. I've always been taught they're trying to kill me. And you go into this village and you start, you know, the march starts walking towards the fence, and we'd get shot, tear gas, rubber bullets, and you have Palestinians dragging you into their houses to offering you shelter, and you have soldiers shooting at you, and it kind of doesn't fit, you know? Everything you've been told just doesn't work out. And I think for me that it was a very interesting experience, because it was not just a breaking of the us and them, but it was also a place of understanding that it doesn't shift. It's not that now I see soldiers as them. I know these people. I mean, most of my friends from high school served in the army. My brother's a career soldier. I know these people. And it just kind of, for me, it was a very interesting experience of understanding that there is no us and them here at all. No matter how and where you try to cut that line. I'll fast forward a bit and leave you with that as as my personal story and just touch on a few more things that I think are really important to understand about militarism here, because militarism doesn't stop at conscription. It's not just about preparing soldiers. It's actually, I would argue, even stronger beyond that, because the truth is, conscription is not so important for Israel, or for the military, at least not from a military perspective. Every single committee that the military has put together to try and understand how the military could be more effective has always come back with the same answer. It should be a professional army. The value of militarism is much more a social political value than it is a military one. And what that means is, for instance, that the whole political system is geared around military service. Since 1967, we've had one Minister of Defense who wasn't a high-ranking officer before becoming Minister of Defense. Now, you tell that to Israelis, they'll all say, well, obviously, it's Minister of Defense. You tell that to anyone else in the world, that's not how it works. A Minister of Defense, it's a political position, right? He's supposed to get his recommendations from the military and his recommendations from the foreign ministry and whoever other political opinions he might get, and come out with a decision. But here, it's almost seen as a military position. And it's filled by military personnel, or ex-military personnel, which is the same. I mean, we've had a few prime ministers who also came from that exact same place. And what it means is that the whole political system is built to solve problems in military solutions. I mean, if you think about someone like, I mean, our Minister of Defense now, Bugi Alon, literally from the age of 18 until his 60s when he retired, he did nothing but be a soldier. Obviously, he's going to solve things like a soldier. He's going to think like a soldier. You're going to, you know, 3 kids get kidnapped. He's not going to think about any solution but a military solution. And in a way, it kind of has Israel stuck in a place, and I think it's important to ask who is it convenient for that we're stuck in that place. Because honestly, I don't think it is convenient for most Israelis. I mean, we don't think about the prices that we pay as a society, but giving up 2 or 3 years of your life is actually a pretty big price if you think about it. And having a society that has fundamental valuing of violence, because soldiers are the ultimate Israeli, right? And soldiers are violent creatures by definition. And they're very masculine creatures by definition. And the whole system is built around that ideal that leaves women behind, that leaves people who are not combat soldiers behind, that leaves people who are not, who won't be pilots because they happen to not be born white. And we don't talk a lot about ethnicity inside Israeli society, but the military, for instance, has one of the many criteria that decides where you'll serve in the army. There's actually 3 main criteria. It's your physical fitness, it's an IQ test that they do, and what's called a quality group, which is classified. There was a Supreme Court case to try to understand what does quality group mean, and nobody ever knows, but they ask you questions about how many rooms do you have in your house, how many siblings do you have, are your parents divorced or not, what neighborhood you grew up in, what school you went to. It's a socioeconomic status. It's very clear that that's what it is. And that affects where you're going to serve in the army. And that means that the army itself also kind of continues the tracking system that already exists in any society, and I'm sure, I mean, the Brits can also talk about this, the Americans can talk about this a lot, of how, you know, schooling and everything tracks people to different directions according to their color and background. But the military in Israel is another barrier that continues to do that. What you served in the army, where you served in the army is going to affect your civilian life. If you were a pilot, you're going to get really good jobs. If you were in intelligence in the right units, you will get into the high-tech industry. That's what our high-tech industry is based on. If you were a border policeman, that's not going to open any doors in your life. So that's another aspect of kind of what are the social prices that Israelis pay. The other side of it is, again, understanding who's actually profiting out of this. And then we have to go back to these very nice generals. And probably the best example for this is Barak, our ex-chief of staff, Minister of Defense, Prime Minister, who it's just a cute example. So when he was Minister of Defense in the previous government, he was in the process of privatizing IMI, Israeli military industry. It's the biggest Israeli military industry company in Israel. He was in the process of privatizing it. He thought he was about to retire. He paused, and he was privatizing it. And then he political things changed, so he didn't retire, so he paused the privatization until he retired. Retired, it's being privatized now, and he is in the bid, together with another business colleague, to buy it. Okay, so I mean, it's pretty much out there. There's a whole lot of people, most of them ex-generals, who have the in the military. So they have the expertise, they have the connections, they have the effect that they have on the political system is extremely strong, and they can make a huge economic profit out of that. Today, 75 to 80% of Israel's military industry is for export. It's not about defense of Israel. It's about the bottom line. Israel today is in the top 10 biggest weapons exporters in the world. It's the #1 weapon exporter per capita in the world. It's now the #1 drone exporter in the world. And we're talking about a huge, huge industry, which also has, you know, it's then Israel is the, I think, 4th biggest military spender in percentage of GDP, 6.2% of our GDP, something like that. The US is 4.4. I don't remember the UK, but the world average is 1.8. No, sorry, the world average is 2.5. The NATO average is 1.8. So it's a lot of spending, but mostly it's just a lot of money coming in. And the reason that Israel can do that is that we can prove our weapons work, unlike a lot of other countries, because they're combat proven. I don't know how many of you in your spare time look at commercials for weapons. I assume not many. I do. But you'll actually see in posters, so you'll have like a poster for a drone, and I'm not kidding, you have posters for drones, and it has a stamp that says battle proven. That's how you market things. And so in the last attack on Gaza, there were over 20 different weapon systems, including missiles, new drones, protective systems, a lot of different things that had their first operational debut during the summer and are now being sold in September. So a month, not even a month after the operation ended, there was a huge military expo of drones near the airport, that's what they sell. And countries are very happy to buy that, and it's important to say that countries, especially the US, and I'm sure this is also true of the UK, but most of the examples I know are from the US, are also happy to use that angle of Israel. I just want to make the point, this is a very two-sided game. So, for instance, I don't know how many of you know the F-35 project?
No. Yeah.
The Americans do. And the Canadians, great. So the F-35 project is supposed to be the last fighter jet, or the last manned fighter jet. It's a very high-tech fighter jet. It's supposed to be stealth. It's not, but that's a different issue. And it's a $1.5 trillion project. Okay. It's spent over 50 years, but it's a $1.5 trillion project. That's in now, I think it's 15th year or so. This plane has had over 360 malfunctions. It's extremely expensive, and there's absolutely no operational use of it. The world is moving to drones. Nobody wants fighter jets anymore. It's a complete waste of money, but too big to fail. Way too many contracts already signed. You can't get out of it. So what does the US do? Nobody wants to buy this. Literally no country in the world was willing to buy this. So the US literally forced Israel to buy with US military aid. I don't know how much you know about the US military aid. It's $3.1 billion a year to Israel. It's the biggest aid recipient. 75% of that has to be bought back in the US. So actually it's a very nice subsidy from Congress to its own arms industry. Israel just happens to get the weapons in the way. Specifically, Israel didn't want to use that money on the F-35 because we really didn't want it. But the US threatened them to stop, to help with what's called the strategic advantage of the army. Mainly the US was saying, we can't guarantee that we'll give you high-tech weapons if you don't buy this plane. And now Israel has bought it, and since Israel has bought it, other countries are starting to buy it. Because if the military in Israel has it, you know, we're going to see what it does. It has to be good. These guys know what they're doing. So this is a little bit about the profit side of how this whole system works. But if you want Israelis to never question that, to never think about that, one of the best things you can possibly do is, I mean, make them join you. today, if you criticize the Israeli military, if you criticize the occupation, you're criticizing yourself, what you did as an 18-year-old kid, what your parents did, what your siblings do, what your best friend is doing. You can't do that. It's almost a psychological mechanism that prevents us from being able to actually criticize what's happening around us because we're doing it. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Let's open this up for more of a discussion.